Over to you, John.
Hi everybody, as I said, John Mills, so a little bit of my background. So I've got 20 plus years in IT. I started off in the tech engineer operations space, moved into that service delivery side, then went into projects and consultancy, and now this design thinking, design strategy kind of took hold of me. And now I do more of a general management in that space and strategy space. So my kind of mission at the minute is to just introduce or enhance that customer and people-centric strategy into either applications, services, teams, and businesses, because I think that's key to any kind of successful endeavor. And that plays a huge part in this stakeholder management. So that people and customer centricity and stakeholder management is key. They really, really work well together. So I'm not saying that things will fail. I'm just saying things can be better if we have that. So the presentation, it's going to be about 20 minutes. Obviously, that's going to be quite, that's quick considering the topic, but we're going to cover some of the essentials. We'll talk about what it is. We'll talk about one way to carry out analysis, even though there are a few. Then we'll talk about some tips and tricks, and then we will open it up for Q&A right at the end. So the presentation will be available through Slack, and Alan will send the presentation out afterwards. So anything that you miss or you want from the presentation, you'll be able to get afterwards. Feel free, obviously, to connect on LinkedIn. And obviously these mentor sessions, we will put this recording on Slack and send that out too. And if you want further information or you want more detail, please just go into the mentor sessions and book a one-on-one session with us. So, right at the end as well. So the QA and bit, I'll open up the video and turn off, and we can have an open face-to-face chat then. So, stakeholder management. What I'd like to start with then is what it is. And the way I'm going to break that down is I'm going to go from a past, present, and future. And it's a nice way of categorizing it, but as you'll see when we go into this, it's actually maybe not so much the future now, it's actually happening or has already happened, but it's a nice way to categorize it. So considering the past, we used to go from like a hierarchical perspective. It used to be very much, we would have a lead, or we would have a CEO or someone of importance that would say, hey, I want this, and this is how we do it. And we tend to structure everything around that. We would put it in like they say that we would want it. The problems with that, or some of the challenges with that, is we're only pleasing one person, and that could be good. But we've since figured out that it's better to, and it's more acceptable to, when there's more people and more stakeholders in the end game. So what we do now, or present, we've got a lot better at that. And by better, I mean we've now started to define it. So I'm not going to go through these verbatim. I'll let you talk let you read as I talk. But I've just taken a couple of examples of one from a project management, one from BA, and then obviously from a dictionary perspective, just about what a stakeholder is. So I'll give you a couple of seconds just to read that. And from my perspective, I've basically summarized it and simplified it slightly, just to basically say anyone who is impacted by what you are doing and can have an impact on the outcome. See, so that just summarizes. I've seen some of them that say anyone and anything. So events can have an impact on your body of work or whatever you're trying to do or what you need stakeholders for. But I still think that there's some sort of people centricity around that. Okay, so it could be an event, but you're not going to talk to an event or try and persuade an event. You're going to talk to a person. So I just like to leave it at anyone. So like I said at the start, I've put this under the category of future, but as you will see, it is happening now and has already happened. So from a future perspective, it is a bit more complicated than we first thought. And the things that I've just put up on the screen, everything now is basically around this customer centricity, what the customer wants, where we talk a lot more now about experience. There are whole departments now that deal with the experience, and we've seen in very across the board in a lot of departments and industries how successful this is. Also, we have what the picture depicts there is feelings. Now, I'm not saying we didn't have feelings before, so obviously there are feelings. The difference with, and why I've put this up now, is this. So we have instant ways now of providing that feedback to us. So from a stakeholder management perspective, you will be told whether you're doing something really well or really poorly instantly. And just as a side note here, I personally believe this is why Agile has got so popular at the minute. You know, we're in an instant world at the minute. You know, there's no waiting for things. And Agile, I feel, has got a lot more popular because it's a little bit more of that instant gratification. I want this now. I'm not willing to wait 12 months for this, you know, all impending project or body of work. So so all those social media streams that give us this feedback straight away. So that's what stakeholder management actually is. What we're going to talk about next is stakeholder analysis. Now, there are lots of different ways to actually do this, and I'm going to talk about one of them. So this one has 4 steps, and the 4 steps are brainstorming, prioritizing, plotting, and then motivate right at the end. So the first one I'm going to talk about, brainstorming. So it's from a stakeholder management perspective, it's essential that, and it's a great team activity, this. So when or if you have a team and you're starting your whole project, it's great to get everybody involved in this. It's a good team activity and you will learn a lot more. So brainstorming is the fact of getting everyone into a room and discussing, right, who is going to influence our body of work? Who are our stakeholders? The more diverse and broader you can have for your team, the better outcome you will get. Some of the stakeholders that you can think of, or some of the people that are out there that become stakeholders, are in that table just there. So the next one I want to talk about then is, so we've brainstormed, we sat in a room and said, right, who can influence our project or body of work? The next one now is we're going to prioritize. And like I said before, this is one way of using it there, and this is called the power interest grid. There are multiple others. There's power influence, there's importance influence, influence impact, and there's a salience model, which basically uses a Venn diagram and filtering. But what I'd like to say here is whatever fits your project the best, then use that. So if it's a power influence one, then use that. The process is pretty much the same. So what we have in a power interest grid, if we look a little bit closer to this, is we have 2 axes, obviously from low to high, and we have power dynamic on one and the interest or stakeholder interest on the other. And then we have 4 key areas. So the one that I've put on screen, normally it's top right, but you'll get the essence of it as we go through it a little bit more. So this top left, so we're talking about now high power and highly interested people. Okay, so these are the most important. So they have a lot of power within the organization or within the department or business that you're doing, and they've got a really high interest in what you're doing. So these people are ones that we must fully engage. Normally, missing these are causes material impact to whatever you're doing. The next one is still in that high power category, so a lot of influence, but they're less interested. Okay, so they have the power to stop or control or direct what you're doing, but they're less interested. The next one is this low power and highly interested. So, and as it says in the brackets here, this manage closely, keep satisfied. These ones are keep informed. So also, these are the people that create movements. You know, you get these people on board and they tell others because they are really, really interested. You know, they're really, they've got skin in the game. They might not be of a certain standing in the organization for it to, you know, they may not have the buy-in power. However, they can really push a message that you're trying to get and a theme that you're trying to get for your body of work. And then the last one is low power and less interested. Okay, so like at the other side of your scale, but also still very worthwhile keeping them in the loop as far as communication, but it's probably wasted if you're going to send too much information to them, given that they're not that interested. So that's a prioritization grid just to map out that. The next thing that we're going to go into is plotting. So we've done the brainstorming, we've sat in a room and we've identified who we think are all our stakeholders. Now we've got this method of going, okay, so where are we going to put them and what are we going to do with them? So the next idea then is to plot. So we get those stakeholders and we plot them into our power interest grid. What I've said at the bottom there is color coding. That really helps. And if you can put that theme across your body of work in all your documentation and things, you very quickly start to naturally think in the, hey, this is red, we need to do something about this, or someone who is red has mentioned something, we need to address this now. This is affecting someone who's red, we need to, you know, prioritize that a little bit more. The next thing that we're going to do, or the last thing that I've put on here, is it's kind of a culmination. You kind of need it in all the three previous stages that we've done, and that's this motivation. So we need to kind of look at what motivates. And here's some of the questions that we can ask around, you know, finding out about the stakeholders' motivation. So the more you do here, the better information that you get, the better you'll be able to plot, and the more success, or the more likelihood of success, your project or body of work is going to be. Interviews are a really good way of capturing this information. You know, if you can't get to a really satisfactory point being in a brainstorming and in a team environment, go out and actually sit with people and ask these questions, or ask other people of these questions. I'll give you a few more seconds to just look through some of these. Like I said, the presentation is going to be available afterwards, so you'll be able to use these questions yourself. And if you go on to if you go onto the web and just type this stuff in, there is a plethora of information that will tell you, you know, what questions to ask, and some tips and tricks and examples. Okay, so that was our stakeholder analysis, or one way of doing stakeholder analysis. So the last thing I want to talk about, well, second to last thing I want to talk about is, as it says there, is the hints and tips. So we've we know what stakeholder management is. We've now done some analysis in a certain way, and really we've got this really great body of information. And now we need to go, right, how do we get these stakeholders on board? How do we get them singing from the same hymn sheet? How do we get them to either organically, or how to persuade them to say yes and to go out into the business and go out into the environments and start saying, hey, this is a great body of work and you need to get on board and help. So what we're going to use is a little bit of science. And I know this came up in one of the questions as well. I can't remember who said it, but it's the science of persuasion. And we're just going to go through that in a little bit more detail now. The science of persuasion was done, this gentleman here, by Dr. Robert Cialdini, PhD. And if you go if you go onto the web and just have a look at this guy, he's noted as being one of the key people in this area, and comes out with some absolute gems as far as the ability to get people to say yes, or to influence them to say yes. And he came out with 6 factors. So the first one, and I'm always get this wrong saying this, so reciprocity. Yay! So this is basically when you give someone something, they have the feeling of wanting to give something back. Okay, so it doesn't always happen, but as an example, if you kind of let someone in a traffic jam, you are more likely then to let someone else into a traffic, if you're in that traffic jam and someone else is trying to get in, right? So it's you give something and then you feel like you want to give back. So that's one. The second one is consistency. This is habits, past behaviors. We are likely to be consistent with the things that we've previously said or done. So from a stakeholder perspective, it's really, really good to get out there and find out about, especially in that high interest and high power quadrant, it's really, really valuable to go and find out how they've behaved previously. What are they like from a project perspective? How involved are they? Are they hands off? Are they, do they look for an outcome rather than micromanaging things, stuff like that? Because like that says, they are more likely to do exactly the same again, which will basically allow you to prepare than they did before. The third one is scarcity, and I'm sure all of us have done this, but from our perspective, especially in the IT world, things that provide scarcity are things like end of life. So if you can say, hey, this has got to go in because it's going end of life, or sometimes there's a discount. We get a discount now if we get it in before the end of financial year. That is a really, really good way to influence and get buy-in. And the last one you can use, this is the last chance to do something. I'm sure all of us have been in that situation where it's the fact that it is scarce that we want it. The next one I want to talk about is consensus. And consensus just means exactly what it says there, right? We will look towards the actions and behaviors of others, especially if we hold them in high regard. So if someone's had past success, you can kind of go, hey, this has happened before and it was really good and it did this. And if you talk about, added value, then people are more likely to buy into that. Also, we can use behaviors of others by saying things like, Bob, the CEO, absolutely agrees with this. What do you think? They're a lot more likely then to say, yeah, okay, I think exactly the same, especially if they're unsure. The next one is like. And this is a really good kind of human interaction relationship thing. So if we like someone, there is a lot more likelihood of us saying yes. Okay, so, and to get to like this, we go back to the interviews, right? If you're genuine in your interviews and you're clear, you provide clarity, relevance, importance, that those types of things, then your relationship gets stronger, and there's a lot more likelihood of that liking part to play a part in this. And then the last one I want to say, or the second to last one actually, is authority. So this is the idea that we follow the lead of someone credible or someone knowledgeable or an expert, a subject matter expert. In our world, I think things like using another department that has a big kind of say in things, like finance just went through this, is a good way to get things across. Another one that I found particularly successful is Deloitte says, or use another kind of really reputable consultancy firm that says, hey, they're saying this is the best thing since sliced bread, and we're doing the same thing and going down the same path. They've got a certain authority, and that plays a really good part in getting them to say yes. And one that's not on here, so a really, really good friend of mine, when I sent this to her, and I said, hey, what do you think about this? She mentioned one more, and I think it's really worthwhile saying it. And this is the fear of saying no. And I'm not so sure we should use this to get you in there. I just want you to be aware of it. So some people just don't like saying no. And it's really good to identify kind of those people as much as you can, because you might get a false positive off them. If you know they're going to say no, it could be the worst idea ever. But just because they don't want to say no, they'll go, yeah, that's great. So it's really, really good way of, it's another good thing of identifying people in that. So that's the science of persuasion. So just as a quick recap, first we talked about the stakeholder and what actually is a stakeholder. Then we talked about 4 steps of analysis, but like I said, this is just one way of doing analysis. The theme is exactly the same. The outcome is you want to categorize and prioritize your stakeholders so you can basically manage them a lot better. And then just the tips and tricks at the end, and we talked about the power of persuasion and getting people to say yes. What I'd like to leave you with, or before we go on to the Q&A bit, is so everything we've done here gives us a really, really good base of information. But like I've said there, that is just the start. There's no good getting all this information if we're not going to actually do something with it. And it's the way that we do something with it where we get the biggest benefit and make the biggest differences. So having the fact that we know all our stakeholders and we've prioritized them and we know that they're high powered, and if we don't actually then change our behavior when we're in front of those people in the best way possible, or what we've done all this information gathering from, then we lose that advantage and we lose all that work. So this is really good, and I suppose that matters across the board. This happens for everybody, no matter what role you are in, or what body of work you're undertaking. Stakeholder management covers you across the board. It helps with your projects and it helps kind of in life. So I think, Alim, that's about it from a presentation perspective. Like I said, it is pretty quick and it's a really big subject, but try not to look at it as a defined phase or a checkbox at the start. It's organic, it constantly changes and it needs constant attention. The more relevant prep you get, the better the outcome. Think of good analogy is like painting. So the more time you put into cutting in and taping up, the better job you get at the end. Sure, if you just paint, you'll paint the room, but you get a lot better job if you do all that hard work up front and do all the, the preparation work. And this is a massive part of preparation and often missed.
Yeah. Great, thank you, John. That was a great presentation. Lots of chatting going on, which you wouldn't have been aware of, in terms of people making comments, asking questions, and other people responding as well. So that was all good. I do have 4 or 5 questions that I've picked out from all the chatter to ask you. Really good questions. And so once I've covered those, we'll then open it up as well to see if there are any further discussion points or questions that people have. Okay, so the first one, if I could direct this to you, John, and actually there's 2 questions around plotting. Okay, so it's 2 questions, and I'll mention both of them so that you can maybe cover them both in one. So in the plotting, how do you identify what color each person needs to be? And have you used impact mapping along with plotting? How does that work? So impact mapping and the colors, how do you determine what color people should be, or where they should go?
Yep, great. So from a color perspective, so you saw the 4 quadrants. So we color code the quadrants, and then
actually, John, do you want to go back to that part of the slide? It might be helpful actually for so just while you're answering it, if you could, then I think it will help people if you're able to.
This bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So look, I've taken just an example off here just to provide the information, but try and use, like, from a mapping perspective, the colors of those quadrants, and then put those into that. So your high-powered, high-influenced users, color code those, and then you can use that throughout your project. And as soon as you see, if you, for example, you use them as red, use the color red, then every time you see that red, you know that there's a certain kind of response that you need to do that. I've talked for ages, so I'm going to let Dev, if he wants to just answer from a second perspective around the prioritization, just in case he's got a separate thoughts around this.
Sure, John. So the color coding is really something you do as part of a discussion with either your sponsor or other members of your team. So it is about understanding who the people are, what drives and motivates them, and also how they fit into your project. So if someone is a high priority stakeholder, who you need, whether they're for the project or against the project, you need to understand how they can influence the project, and then color code them accordingly. Typically, for me, I don't know, John, whether you use the same kind of color coding as I do, but for me, if I'm color coding people, then I color code them according to whether they're pro or against the project. So for me, anyone who's color coded in red would be someone who is, not necessarily a supporter. So, and someone who's green is someone who definitely is a supporter. And that helps you understand how to manage their expectations and communicate with them. And then regarding your question about impact mapping, I think impact mapping for me is more about how your end product will impact behaviors, as opposed to how you actually engage with people during the project. So one is about how what you're going to deliver is going to have an impact on people, and understanding that is obviously very important because it colors what and how you are going to deliver the end product. Whereas one is, while you're delivering, how do you keep people on side and keep them connected to the work you're doing?
Okay, perfect. And I'm just going to ask some following subsequent questions on this, right? So I think a lot of the questions were on the mapping, etc. There may be questions on other areas that I'll cover afterwards, but just staying on this topic then, one of the questions is, so once you've mapped people, especially if you've identified them as red, you want to kill them, you want to bring them on board, whatever color you use. How do you ensure that people don't see this stakeholder map? Because obviously it could be quite confidential then. So what do you do and who sees it? I guess, how do you ensure people don't see it, especially if you're working with several people? How do you ensure the information doesn't get out? And actually, who do you share it with and how wide do you circulate it?
So
who wants to pick that?
Yeah, I'll start with this, and I'm sure Dev will have a little bit to say about this too, because I think it very much depends on the person that's kind of running it. So I'm very much an advocate to transparency. I don't think I get what you're saying, that there are some things in there that could be a little bit controversial. But at the end of the day, for me, the outcome is what everybody wants, right? So the more transparent you are with that, and the more transparent you are with the information, especially within your own internal team. There is a school of thought that wants to separate them, and I can understand the value of that. Keeping that information internal to the project team is a really good thing. But I tend to feel like I don't put things in there that other people outside of the team can be. And more often than not, they don't kind of get it anyway. You're not actually saying it's a negative thing. You're just saying this is something that we have to be aware of. And I've often come across the fact that if someone has seen it, they've kind of actually gone, oh, I didn't know I'd come across like that, and they've actually changed their behaviors for it, which has really been positive. Dev?
Yes, I agree completely, John. I think being transparent is a very important element of how you manage projects. And also it's about taking away the personalization from it. So you are talking about people, definitely. And by saying that they're against the project, it does not make it a personal thing. So as long as you're saying you believe they are, okay, maybe the word against is not right, but maybe they're being objective about the project is perhaps a better description. But certainly, as John says, when people see this and they recognize that that's how you perceive them, they're very often happy to either change their position or try to come to an understanding with you as to how you can actually work with them to convince them that what you're doing is the right way. I've actually presented a stakeholder map at a board where I had marked board members on the stakeholder map. And I had marked a couple of them in red and in different parts of the quadrant. And when they saw that, a number of them agreed that, yep, that seemed to be the right kind of position. And a couple of them actually disagreed. And so I then ended up having a conversation with them and worked with them to make them more supportive of the project and to understand why they came across as being negative for the project. So I definitely advise, doesn't matter who sees it, as long as you take the personalization out of it. It's not about who doesn't like you or who doesn't like the project. It is about what they are bringing to or against, what they're bringing to the project, whether it's pro or against.
Okay, thank you. And Nish said something amusing in the chat, which made me smile, which is they can either change or sack you. So I guess
She's true.
Yeah, but I think.
I think it was a bit of a flippant thing, Nish. But I would then say that then you need to understand what your role in the project is. If you are a project manager, you need to be empowered and have that authority to actually decide and help deliver the project. And if you have not got that, then there is something fundamentally wrong in the organization or on the project. So that would be something that needs to be dealt with. And key to all of this is, remember, although you are a project manager, you shouldn't be working on these things alone. You have a sponsor, you have a board. So all of those people should be helping you govern and manage it. If they're not, then again, something fundamentally wrong there.
Okay, let me, before we move on to another question, because there are others, let me just open it up. So if people have any other points that they want to raise around this topic verbally. So if anyone wants to kind of ask a question or make a comment about what we've just said, please unmute yourself now, and feel free to ask or say whatever is on your mind. Do you agree, disagree, have you used this, etc.? Does anyone want to make a comment or ask a question?
While people are thinking, Alan, I think in the chat there was a bit of a discussion around how do you communicate with your stakeholders, and a lot of people seem to get stuck on, well, we're just sending out emails, keeping people updated, they're not reading them, and we're not we're not engaging with them. My response to that is you shouldn't just be sending emails. There's so many different ways of communicating with your stakeholders, and each and every one, part of stakeholder mapping and stakeholder analysis is understanding how each of the key stakeholders likes getting messages. Some people are very visual, some people are like reading documents, long documents, some people like being told what's happening. So recognizing how each stakeholder needs to be engaged with and then delivering those messages in those ways is important. It is also a good way where you may have a lot of stakeholders to reduce those numbers, or potentially a lot of stakeholders, everyone who all believe they should be having an influence on the project, is if they are senior people and if they are of high influence and they do have an impact on your project, then to them on a one-to-one basis, which means a commitment of their time and a commitment of your time, sure, but you'll quickly find that those numbers will whittle down once they recognize that, yes, oh, I'm very important, but I don't have time for this project, in which case you're not that important.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to come on to that. Yeah, go on, John.
I was going to add the same thing, right? You need a communications matrix alongside this, really, to, as Deb's just articulated, you know, like the managing director, he likes you to drop in the office, give him a 5-minute update. The man from legal, he likes to see 300 reams of documentation and take 3 weeks to digest it and observe it. So, yeah, I think that's a very key point that Dev's made there, actually. It's not just
to elaborate on that, guys. Sorry, John.
No, go ahead.
Just to elaborate on that as well, guys, is so email, and we're shockers for this. So email gets 30% of your message across, right? So if you want to get a message across using email, you're only going to get 30% across. It takes away facial expressions, it takes away body language, and it takes away tone, which are 70% of how humans interact. Yeah. So if you just use email, then you're going to get 30% of your message across.
And we all know the senior guys, well, right, not generalising, but most senior guys know they don't read email, right?
Many people don't read email, John. Especially if it's broadcast on
just from my own experiences of, I mean, I can't be times we all said, "Oh, I sent you an email on this," and they said, "No."
I think another important element of stakeholders is that it's not just about the senior people. I think, and we all recognize this, but it's worth mentioning that the people we're delivering to, the users, are also stakeholders, and how we engage with them is equally important. So when you're rolling out to 10,000 people, you can't meet them individually, and they're unlikely to read emails, especially if it's something about how a new system is being put in place or how a new policy is going to influence them. So how do you engage with them? And learning to, putting together workshops, road shows, and all those kind of things are different techniques of engaging with stakeholders.
So you need those guys, right? You need the people you're delivering to. You need them to. They're the ones who are going to. If they don't, if you don't implement correctly, then your project won't be successful, right?
Yeah.
So, and someone's messaged me privately saying a point that I'm going to raise, which is also what I think has been touched on and what I do, which cuts across a lot of what we said anyway, is that the stakeholder map could actually be generated with the stakeholders. Right? So not necessarily the colors, you know, what we said about red and, you know, are they challenging or whatever, but the whole stakeholder map could obviously be done in collaboration. So they could put themselves as to whether, you know, they want to be kept satisfied or whatever. However, I agree with that, but it brings me to one final question which I've noted down, which is overkill of stakeholders. So this person said, you know, they've been involved in projects where everyone wants to be a senior stakeholder. Okay, so you know, then they're not less important than someone else. So they all kind of try and push themselves as to where they think they should be seen. And once that's done, it skews the actual stakeholder map. And then, you know, then they might not read it, people might not take it seriously, etc. So how do you deal with, whether it's done in collaboration and people have positioned themselves as a senior stakeholder, or even if it was done for a few people, you know, just a small project team, and you've put people in the stakeholder, in the senior category or whichever category, you know, keep satisfied, etc. How do you ensure that those people remain engaged over the life of the delivery? And that might be 3 months, 6 months. What do you do to change it, keep people engaged, do it correctly, etc.? And this discussion we can obviously open up to everyone. I'll start off with John. This is the lead for the session, but then I'll open it up to others as well. So John Mills.
Yeah, so great question, and it will depend on your experience, absolutely. So I mentioned at the start in that brainstorming, the diversity of that brainstorming group, and who you get in there, but there is a balance. There absolutely is a balance, and when we got onto the sensitivity of information, nobody likes to go, yes, I'm highly powered and I'm highly interested, and you go, no, you're not. Right? Nobody likes that. So you do have to put a little bit of thought into that, because it's ultra important. So that's kind of my little bit on that first part. Dev?
Yes, and another way I've found that's been helpful is you try and categorize what influence and how important they are, how they're important to the project. So while someone may be important from a financial perspective, others may be important from a engagement perspective. So if you try, I mean, again, a lot of this is down to common sense and using the people around you, that brainstorming group that you have, which should, in my opinion, include people like your program director or the key sponsor for the project, because they're the ones in whose interest it is to deliver the project, and they are there to also help you identify, yes, all these people are important, but these are the more important people, because, and here's why they're more important. So categorizing the level of importance, and then using the people around you to actually specify how people are important. That's quite important.
Alan, just to finish this off, Alan, just to finish this off as well. So when I said about the balance in that brainstorming meeting about the stakeholders, a really, really good thing to do is, if you decide not to put them in, like personally invite some of those people into the brainstorming, it may seem like a silly thing that I'm just about to say, but it absolutely works. And that is, actually identify a seat in that brainstorming room and stick a name on it. You know, so if you want to put a customer or you want to put the CEO, actually have a place for them in that room. And they might not be there in person, but it does get that room to think about that person or that group or that particular department or something.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say,
yes,
from my experience, is so obviously things are remote at the moment, it's a bit difficult, but when I can have a relationship with somebody over the phone or whatever, once I meet that person, the engagement and the relationship just shoots up massively. It makes it so much better. I think it's worth spending that time building relationships with people, and you get to know the ones who will react quickly, the ones who you have to chase so many times, and it's getting those people then on board to help you. Then, as you know, just building that relationship makes them a bit more open to helping you with other people. Sorry, that was a bit rambling, but
no, it's right.
I think I got my point across.
Yeah, and so I want to. I have a couple of comments to make on this particular topic before I see if there's questions on any other areas. So before I kind of try and summarize or add these comments, anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak yet that wants to make a comment or ask a question about what we're talking about, so the stakeholder map in particular. Anyone else? Okay, so let me just as I said, just finish up on this section. 2 points that came to my mind. One is that for anyone who's keen to do a certification, to do a course around stakeholder mapping, rich communication, which was mentioned, so not just using email, etc., and many other factors around what we've discussed. A course that I've done, so I can vouch for, is the APMG Change Management course. It's a 5-day course if you do the foundation and practitioner, or 3-day for foundation. The primary topics of this course are all around essentially what John has presented on. So, as you know, not everything obviously, but yeah, a lot of this stuff comes up in there. Really good course. Okay, so I thought I'd mention that. The second that I just want to kind of leave you with, just to think about for yourselves, is that with everyone thinking about agile these days and sprints and scrums and short deliveries, rather than maybe the traditional waterfall method of doing this over, say, 6 months or whatever it might be, is that you could have this stakeholder list of, say, I don't know, 50 people, for argument's sake, they're all your stakeholders for the duration of the entire project, which might be a 6-month, 12-month project. But if you're doing sprints of 4 weeks as an example, then actually you can modify your stakeholder map to each sprint. So that way you're keeping it current, and who you need to keep satisfied and who's important might change and be current for that particular sprint and the outcome that you're trying to get from that sprint. Okay, let me, so they're just thoughts to leave you with. Let me take us in a different direction, if I may. I think there's one other question that just came in. Let me just find it. So the question is, how does SIAM influence stakeholder management? And so the SIA Model Town model, I think, so, I'm just kind of clarifying a bit in that if you have supplies as well, or there's different towers of delivery, how do you do the stakeholder map across, not just your organization, but externally, and yeah, in the SIAM model? Who wants to pick that up?
Yep, I don't mind.
Okay, John.
So from a SIAM's all about end-to-end management, right? So it's, again, we're going down that perspective of there is a customer at the end of it that gets an outcome, and someone needs to be accountable across the whole journey. So from that, you are going to include internal and external suppliers. You're going to include management. You're going to include customers, all that. So that broadens your spectrum a lot, but it still boils down to those people who can have an impact on what you are actually doing. So it doesn't matter whether they are external contractors and stuff. If they can have a material impact, or even just an impact on there, you have to evaluate them and prioritize them. If you are doing this correctly, you have to address that at one stage or another, and it doesn't really matter about where they are coming from or what division and stuff they're in.
Right, so we have about 10 minutes left. So rather than asking for another answer on that question, again, let me just open up to see if there are questions around any other part of the presentation, because most of it has been on the stakeholder map and the plotting. Anything else that you saw that you want to ask a question around? Remember to unmute yourself. It seems like there might not be. So, John, maybe that one, I found it useful, but maybe next time round it's just a stakeholder map, and we could easily have 20 minutes on there, right? So, anything else then on anything else? Anyone want to make a comment or ask a question? Or if we ended the call, are you all satisfied? Please don't hold back.
Just while people are thinking there, I do have a couple of things that I took off when we first did this. There was a little box to say, have you got any things that you want out of this? I went through those and I took a couple of those questions out. I think we've addressed most of them, but I just turned the page and I did realize that someone asked around stakeholder KPIs. And I didn't really understand that so much, so I was going to open that up to kind of yourself and Dev, just to maybe elaborate on that if you have. There was another question around typical errors. So the main one for me from an error perspective is people just don't do this correctly and don't realize the importance of it. And the other one was, the last one, should I say, was conflicting priorities. And again, that is very much experience based. So priorities speak for itself. If it's a higher priority, it should go higher. And if it's not, then it should go lower. That's as soon as, and I know that's a very simplistic way of doing it. And in actual reality, that's a really tough thing that like a project manager has to deal with. But there are ways of kind of getting around that. So yeah, that's stakeholder KPIs. If you guys can elaborate on that, because I didn't typically understand that.
So actually, let me be quiet, right? So I do chip in from time to time, but I really should be quiet and leave it to others. So I'm happy to pick it up if no one else will, but anyone else, and it doesn't have to be Dev, we have other mentors on the call, just other people who obviously have a keen interest in this. Anyone else want to touch on the KPIs that they've used with stakeholders or what they could be?
Okay. Just from my perspective, I think KPIs for stakeholders is really about communication KPIs rather than stakeholder KPIs. So it is about the kind of messaging that you want to get out and how often do you want to get those messages out. And it shouldn't make a big difference as to who the stakeholders are, because it is all about communicating and letting people know what's going on. That's how I would approach it.
Okay. Let me then just mention something, if I may, and because there's one other question that I want to raise that's come in. So if you're doing any metrics, so KPIs or reporting or whatever the metrics might be on the stakeholder map as an example, or stakeholders, and then just like you would do in a RACI, so let me just use RACI, where you have accountable, responsible, consulted, informed, or the stakeholder map of keep satisfied, or they're a champion, they're a big influencer, they have huge impact. So whichever model you use, the metrics that I would look to run would be on the ones that I'm most interested in for that part of the sprint or the delivery. And so if they are, for example, champions, and I've marked some champions on a stakeholder map, and I really, really need them championing whatever, right? Maybe we've rolled something out. They really need to go and sell this or communicate with 10 people, or communicate with this team, or get people to buy in, or whatever it might be. That's where I may have some KPIs on the champions as an example. Did they do what they were meant to do? Did they get their department buying in or using the system? Perhaps the KPI is the use of the system, right? You've just rolled out a system to 10,000 people. If only 50 people are using that system, when perhaps you're expecting 500 to use it, then you may have a KPI there linked back to your stakeholder map as an example. Okay, so I just thought I'd give my comment. Let me ask the other question that has come in, so I'll just change the subject. The question is, what are the easiest ways to manage stakeholder expectations? So just kind of more general here, so not specifically around doing a stakeholder map, but you have stakeholders. Doesn't matter where they sit on your grid. How do you manage stakeholder expectations just generally? Who would like to kind of give their view?
It's just about getting to know how they will. Sorry, let me start again. It is about just engaging with them, understanding what makes them tick, and what would actually satisfy them ultimately.
Can I throw something else in? Mm-hmm. It's engaging with stakeholders is best done when you get them all together. As far as I'm concerned, you get them all into a room and allow them to beat each other up so that they manage their own expectations. Rather than you try and foist expectations upon them, get them to come up with their own. And if they're in a group of their peers, they will naturally come to conclusions.
Yep. Okay. And so rather than just... Dev, sorry if I may, because some other questions that come in, because, great question, right? And, some of it, people, it'll be common sense for some people, and we've had obviously some comments. It's tough, right? The expectations are different for different people. And I guess first at the heart of it, you need to try and understand what their expectations may be. Their expectations may be little involvement, as an example, right? And managing little involvement might be easy, actually, quite straightforward. But let me just ask another question, if I may, that's come in.
Sorry, can I just pause it just for a couple of moments? So Jerry, just on your point about getting everyone in a room, sometimes that's not possible. So it is a case of identifying how and who the people are that you want to engage with. A CEO is unlikely to want to join a working group, so you can't get them together, or won't come together in a focus group. And if they are important members, then you need to engage with them individually. So you hear what you're saying, and for a number of cases it would work, but I think you do need to still engage individually with some of the key stakeholders and understand what makes them tick, how it works, and what will make them participate in the project in the way you want them to participate in the project.
Yeah. Sorry, Deb, I wasn't implying that that's the only method. But when you've got a large group of stakeholders, it's often advantageous to your project to get them to come to a consensus amongst themselves. If you have to use technology as we are now to do that, then do it. It's about getting them to come to that conclusion that the project is paramount. This is why we're here. So our petty squabbles are simply that. They're petty squabbles. Let's sort those out. Now we move forward on a common basis.
Yeah. So, and before COVID, often stakeholder engagement would be done around the coffee machine or on a cigarette break, or whatever it might have been for people, right? Maybe at the gym these days, where everyone's trying to be healthy. But anyway, so look, one other question, if I may, just to get in there before our time runs out. The question came in, and I know we touched on this already, and it's still around stakeholder map. So John, it feels like we need a whole session on stakeholder mapping and nothing else. But anyway, so the question that's come in is, how often do you exercise the stakeholder analysis? Because of course people change, people's views change, the timing in the project changes. How often do you do it? So you do it right at the start, for example. Let's just assume it's a 6-month project. When would you do it again? When would you update your stakeholder map? If I could direct out John, please, as the last answer.
Yeah, so for me, look, I update that as from an experience perspective. I've updated that weekly. Seriously, when I have those meetings with certain stakeholders and I feel like there's something's changed, or the landscape's changed, or something's happened, I will go back to that stakeholder map and I will just make a little note inside there, and I'll just say, hey, this is how it is. Or I will just make a mental note to say, no, it's the same as kind of last week. But it's really, really important to keep an eye on that. If it's all going really, really well, dependent on how long your project is or this body of work is, I wouldn't leave it over a month. I would put a reminder in there for it to pop up and say, hey, you need to have a look at this, even if things are going like swimmingly.
Okay. Thank you. That was a great session. A lot of comments have come in, John, Dev, and others, around it being 10 out of 10, great, really beneficial, etc. So well done. Let's end the call there because we're at time. Thank you to John, Dev, and for all of your contributions. I will, for those that have asked me, I will be sharing the presentation and the questions and the video with you all afterwards. So thank you. I'll stop the recording there.